All right, so after 20 plus years of being a hack guitar player, and after 5 years of going to hundreds of recording studios of other musicians, I have created what I think is the absolute best setup for playing, writing, and recording guitars with amps and pedals. And I'm gonna show you exactly how we have this system set up. And by the way, when you use it, it looks like this still, which is pretty good. Let's get into it. Let's start with writing, because writing can be a bunch of different things. A lot of people will just write with a loop. They'll throw on a beat and they'll just create a loop and write part by part for the song. Some people write with instrument, just sitting down, playing an instrument. Pretty much everything in the studio, and I'll use guitar as the example here since that's what we're talking about, is just always on. Meaning that if you're gonna pick up a guitar, let's say an electric guitar, all you have to do is plug it in. You plug it in, you turn up the volume, and you can hear the guitar. Okay, so input comes on, we've got the tuner. Let's just do like a clean thing right now. So I've done nothing, just immediately we can hear guitar coming through the speakers. So when I walk over here and I want to hear an instrument, all I have to do is just make sure that my speakers are set to, the right setting and turned up, and then I can theoretically touch an instrument and not only hear it through the speakers, but it's also being sent to the headphones. So that's the context here, is if we're trying to write something or come up with an idea, is you get the instant gratification of hearing the sound or effect in that moment, either through the speakers or through the headphones. This always on workflow, you can take that concept and apply it to any instrument. You sit down at the drum kit, you put headphones on, you turn up the volume on the headphone box, you hear the headphones. And by the way, everyone who has headphones can hear the drums in their headphones, and I can hear them in this room coming out of my speakers. This always on workflow allows for maximum flexibility and creativity, because is like nothing more annoying than having an idea or something that you want to pounce on and you can't because you gotta where's the mic, or somebody moved the mic stand, or all of these different steps that can slow things down. In this studio, everything is just set. That way you can have the instant gratification of getting that idea out right then in that moment. So that's for the writing side. Now, if you're curious about the logistics of that's more of like a studio setup topic, and in my case it has a lot to do with the interface I'm using and how I have everything routed and set up within the software for the interface, and the routing with my monitor and headphone system and things like that. I've done a handful of videos where I basically walk you through that. You can check those out here on the channel. Also, I do consultations. I have a consultation in 27 minutes with someone, and almost all of the time that is the topic for discussion. If you want, you can go to my website and book a consultation with me, and we can talk about it. The other big benefit of this guitar rig and this studio setup is flexibility. So I said before, you can plug the guitar in and you can play the guitar and you can just hear it. Part of the way that this system works with the flexibility is with the amp switcher. And the amp switcher I'm using is a Cahayan 8x4, which means you can have 8 different guitar amps set up with the switcher, and you can have 4 different speaker outs. So what that means in my studio practically is you have several options for guitar amps, and then you have several options for hearing those guitar amps. One of the first ways that kind of the default that I leave on is the Oxbox, the Universal Audio Oxbox. This is a cab
emulation box. It's all analog, so you go in, you can go through. It's also got a amp attenuator built in, but the way that I'm using it is the cab emulation. So in other words, I can select which amp I want to use with the amp switcher, and then I can send the amp output to the Oxbox, which has a direct output. You can come out mono or stereo. I'm just using a mono channel out of the Oxbox, and then I have different presets for how I have the cabinets set up within the Oxbox software. The three that I go to is a 4x12 setup, a 2x12 setup, and a 1x12 setup. And you also have access to a room mic knob on the front of the Oxbox, so you can get that dry cabinet sound, or you can turn up your room sound if you're layering guitars. And just having the flexibility of switching between the different cabinet emulations right on the box is really powerful, because if you have multiple musicians in here playing at the same time and you're tracking live, you can kind of just click to a different cabinet and hear, is this doing the thing that we're wanting or not? No, click 1x12, no, 2x12, ooh, that's perfect. So the Oxbox is fantastic with that. Also, because it's cab emulation, it's not super loud, which is another way that it helps with the actual tracking process. If you're using a whole band, you can get that tube amp and cabinet sound without it actually being noisy in the space. And a pro tip is, if you're gonna do that, it also helps to capture the direct signal of the guitar at the same time, which we have set up in here just as a default as well. The reason you grab the direct signal is later when you do some mixing, sometimes it's nice to have that direct signal to reamp cabs when you can make noise through a guitar cab. So that's how we use the Oxbox in this guitar setup, but the other speaker out literally goes to another room here in the studio where we have different cabinets set up with microphones on them. So I can just pick the amp, listen on the Oxbox, and then when we're ready to track through microphones, hit output number 2, which sends it to the cabinet in the other room, and those are hitting an SM57 and a Royer 121. Those touch the API mic pre's, which sound absolutely fantastic. I also have a couple microphones in the room there, because sometimes capturing the room mics on the guitar amp can be really useful in the mixing process as well. So this is what I mean by flexibility. You get the Oxbox for the writing or direct signal when you need to not have bleed from the guitar amp, but then you also have the flexibility to switch to microphones on a cabinet. And here in my workflow, having both of them ready just at the press of the button really does make a huge difference both in flexibility and speed for recording and getting sounds, but it also gives you that same flexibility and speed on the mixing side and production side of things. So the next part of this has to do with reamping. So I mentioned before, sometimes when you're tracking guitars, it's beneficial to capture that direct signal and use that for reamping in the mixing session. I just did this for this really cool rock project that we mixed. There's a video of breaking down the whole mix on this channel. Basically, the guitar player recorded DIs, and he was using a Neural DSP plugin for the amp tone. And when we got mixing, I just wanted to have more of a difference between the guitars that were doubled. So what I did is I took those direct signals, and I have it set up here where it's just a preset to an analog output, and that analog output goes to our radial reamp box, which is just right next to the pedal board. So if I do want to reamp that pedal board that's sitting there with the cable, instead of plugging it into a guitar, you plug it into the reamp box, which is the output signal from the session, and that goes right into that same chain I just explained before. So your reamp is now coming out, hitting the pedal board, going out of the pedal board to the amp switcher. This is basically the just ultimate plugin for the guitar amp chain. So when I do this, I can grab a section of the song, loop it to find the tone for it, and then I go over there and I start playing with pedals. I start mixing and matching pedals, and then I'll switch to the cabinet that I want to use. And then if I need to, I can move the mics around, swap mics, especially when you're layering on the mixing side. Being able to move the mics to different positions and literally use different mics or a different cabinet all together makes all of the difference on the mixing side. So having that chain literally just be one cable move to be able to reamp and find those guitar tones. Another benefit is having all these amps stacked up on the amp shelf. As long as they're not combos, I do keep a combo in here depending on what we're trying to do. But sometimes I'll move the combos into the amp room and actually mic those combos. Now the rub when we're doing that is you actually have to go into that room to adjust the settings on the amp cabinets.
Now that we got that out of the way, let's go through some of the specifics on gear for my gearhead friends here. And since our friends over at Sweetwater are sponsoring today's video, thank you Sweetwater for sponsoring this video. It only makes sense to have a little gear roundup here, and you can get links to all of this stuff here in my studio down in the description. Take you right to Sweetwater. So let's check it out. So we already covered the Kahayan amp switcher here and the Oxbox. This is like a cool little box that I got to put everything in. This is like a 4 rack unit box. It's really well built and actually is pretty affordable. We've got the power conditioner in here, the speaker selector, and the Oxbox all in one case. It's very sturdy, and you know, it just kind of keeps things consolidated nicely on the shelf. Our 4 amps that we've got here, there's actually a 5th amp in the other room that I can't show you, but you'll see it soon. The Rev G20 here, this thing is awesome. The clean channel on here sounds really, really nice, and then the overdriven channel here sounds really good too. It's got a few different settings here with this aggressive button and pre and post button. It's got a nice EQ on here. Down underneath that is this classic Supro Blackmagic reverb. You've got the channel 1 and 2 combined, and then you've got the channel 2 input here. This has got the tremolo on it, and then it's also got the reverb. Sounds just rock and roll. Down under that, this is actually a amp that I'm borrowing. This is the all hand-wired Vox AC30, and this thing is just pure rock and roll. And lastly, over here we have the Fender Princeton Reverb. This is the Sweetwater Special Edition. It's got the Cannabis Rex speaker inside, and this thing is awesome. Very flexible, and you can use it on a ton of different styles of music. And then over here we have our pedal board. You can see this setup kind of macro here is nice and clean. Got an extra power strip here for any additional pedals we want to add in the middle, but you've essentially got your output of your pedal board right here to the amp switcher, which goes behind the whole thing. This 1/4 inch cable either goes to the reamp box or to the guitar, depending on what you're doing. Simple setup here. We've got a compressor pedal, fuzz. Got the ODR, overdrive, protein. This is the Walrus Audio Juliana pedal. It's like I use it too much. It's so good. And then we've got this Strymon Flint, which is tremolo, reverb, and then we have the Strymon Tape Echo El Capistan pedal, and this is also another great Walrus overdrive pedal. It's called the Ages. These are my favorites to keep on the board, and you can just quickly jump in and out of a bunch of different genres. Moving up here, we have our preamps, and depending on what we're doing, currently we're using the Warm Audios for our synth and bass. Oops, I just turned it off. Bass and Oxbox. So the aux hits the Warm Audio, and then the two guitar mics hit the APIs above it. So that's a very easy switch and adjustment depending on what we're trying to do. And then when it comes to microphones, depending on what we're trying to do, I'll start with a 57 and a 121. And if we're layering stuff, then we'll swap mics. Maybe we'll put WA14, or we'll do something with room mics, or we'll maybe try the Biodynamic M160 ribbon mic, which sounds fantastic. It all just depends on what character we're trying to get out of the cabinet. If we want air, if we want it to be brighter or darker, to cut, to sit, to fill space. That's a total other topic, but that's generally the microphones that I will reach for, and then the positioning is a whole other thing. But hope you guys like this video. I hope you got some value. Thank you to Sweetwater for sponsoring. If you have any questions for me, leave them down in the comments. Happy to chat with you about that. If you are doing something with your own studio and you just want to have a one-on-one call with me, again, check the website. You can book consultations there. And if you happen to be a drummer and you want to go on a trip to Nashville, we're doing a drum recording workshop here in the studio, October 11th, 12th, and 13th. Some of the tickets have been sold, but there's still a few left, so check the website on there. You can book it, make a Nashville weekend trip out of the whole thing. And that's it. Thank you guys for watching. See you in the next one.